Hi everyone, welcome back to the farm. I'm Salisha. Today I want to talk to you guys about a pretty in-depth video and go into everything you need to know about raising laying hens. Now, raising laying hens is going to be different from just keeping backyard chickens just for fun, and it's also going to be different from keeping meat birds, which is going to be a different process altogether. They're all going to basically start the same way when they're chicks in a brooder, but once they reach a few months old, like maybe 2 months old, it's going to change because you're going to do different things for different birds because you have different uses for them. So when it comes to laying chicks, you basically have to source your chickens first. So first you can go to a hatchery, which is somewhere you can go to get registered or unregistered breeds. You can choose the type of chicken you want, you can choose the colors you want. So this is probably the best place where you can go to get chickens, in my opinion. You can get them as day olds, which means they're 1 day old, and you have to get them, pick them up from the mail or from a designated drop-off spot, and then you bring them home. Now, once you have your chicks home, you're gonna have to set up a brooder. A brooder is basically any type of container that the chickens are gonna stay in, or a smaller coop or something like that. In that brooder, you're gonna have to have 3 things, and these are very important for when you're starting your day-old chicks. And this is the same where you're gonna raise basically any chicken at the beginning, but we're gonna start getting into laying hens specifically. So in the brooder, you're gonna want chick starter. You're gonna have to go to a Tractor Supply or some sort of farm supply store, and you're going to tell them you need chick starter because you're starting with brand new day-old chickens. You're also going to need some straw or some hay or some wood shavings, basically something that's going to be used as bedding underneath on the ground. They don't want to just walk on the cold ground, that's too cold. So they need some sort of bedding. They're also going to need a waterer. Now you're going to find waterers like this pretty much everywhere. They're readily available. You do want a specific waterer because you don't want to just put a bowl of water in there. The chicks can go in there and drown, or they can get totally drenched, and if they're too wet, they'll end up dying from pneumonia or cold. So you do want to make sure you get an actual waterer. Along with that, you're gonna need probably the most important thing, and that is a heat lamp. So a heat lamp is basically a light that it has a heated light bulb, and you're able to place it right over the brooder. So you're gonna have to either install it in the roof or install it on the side with clips. Make sure, it's very important, that you don't put your heat lamp anywhere that it's going to fall or anywhere that's too close to the bedding, because you could start a fire, because remember, you're using dry wood shavings or straw as the bedding, and that heat lamp produces heat. So you don't want it to get too close. Another reason you don't want it to get too close is because the chickens are gonna get too hot. You wanna keep them nice and warm so that they're together, but they're still walking around and they're, living their life. If they're too spaced apart, and they're far away from the heat lamp, that means it's too warm. So if you're seeing them and they're like huddled over in a corner away from the heat lamp, it's too warm and you need to move that heat lamp up a bit more. If they're all huddled really, really close under the heat lamp and they're trying to get as much heat, and you're seeing them a little bit shaky and they're just huddled right under that heat lamp, well, maybe it's a little too cold and you want to move it a little bit closer. So you're gonna have to monitor that every day to see, because the chickens are gonna grow, and as they grow you might have to move the heat lamp. So just monitor that every day as you're checking their water and as you're filling up their feed. So now you have your brooder and everything you need for your chickens. They're gonna start growing really quickly. They're gonna start pooping a lot, and you're gonna have to change that bedding out, the water and the feed, and keep everything nice and clean for them. So what breeds of chickens should you choose if you want laying hens? Well, there's a few different types of chickens you can choose. There are quite a few breeds actually that are very good egg producers. Commercial egg producers actually use a bird called the leghorns, but we find that they're quite flighty, and so a lot of people who own backyard chickens or homesteads usually don't have leghorns because they're very flighty and they're not like friendly. We usually go with birds that are a little more friendly and not so flighty, and they'll let us come up to them and hang out with them, like my barred rocks here. Barred rocks, Rhode Island Reds, Buff Orpingtons, Windonets. There are quite a few breeds. You can look up any of these breeds, and these are the ones that I recommend personally, which have been proven to produce really, really, really good eggs on a consistent basis for quite a few years, at about 4 or 5 years before their egg production decreases. So Barred Rocks, Rhode Island Reds, Buff Orpingtons, the Sussex is also a really good one, and the Windonets. So now you have your breeds, you have your brooder, you have everything set up, and your chickens are growing and they're doing well. At this stage, your chickens are called pullets. So you have to help me get them in the same side.
Coming down.
Roger. So, okay, so you have your chickens, they've been growing, and they're a couple months old now, a month and a half to 2 months old. What are you gonna do with them? Well, this is the time when you have to assess whether or not it's time to let them outside. So you're going to think about where you want to put your chickens, and this is where you're going to think about your permanent structure for your chickens. So are they going in a chicken coop? Do they have a chicken run? So the most important thing you want to think about when you get your chickens and you put them outside from the brooder is security. Everything wants to eat your chickens, hawks, foxes, raccoons. There are many, many predators that are going to try to eat your chickens. So you are the sole responsibility for keeping these chickens safe. So you want to make sure that when you put them in your chicken coop or your chicken run that they're very secure. So when you build your chicken coop or when you bring them outside, you want to make sure that they're completely enclosed all around, and you want to also make sure that nothing's going to be able to dig underneath to get to your chickens, because there are digging creatures that will dig to get underneath, like raccoons and weasels and things like that. So make sure that you do invest in a nice secure chicken coop so that you keep your birds safe. Also think about the fact that there are predators that are going to come from above, so maybe some wire netting above will also be beneficial. Now this is where weather is going to be a concern, because your chickens are too big to be inside in the brooder, but they're just the right size that they can start coming outside. So it's your judgment to figure out whether or not your chickens are going to be too cold without the heat lamp, because even when I bring my chickens out for the very first time, I still keep the heat lamp on for the first week or two, depending on the temperature. If I bring them outside and it's the middle of summer, I probably don't need that heat lamp on all the time. Maybe just at nighttime when the temperature drops. But during the day, maybe they're outside running around and it's sunshine and it's beautiful. When it's cold outside, spring, winter, fall, weather like that, you probably do want to keep that heat lamp on. Just monitor your birds and make sure none of them are cold. Because if they're cold, turn that heat lamp on and just keep them warm. It's better to make sure that they stay warm rather than trying to turn it off too early and losing your birds. Another important thing to make sure is that the chickens stay dry. So make sure when you bring them into the coop that it has a nice secure roof and that at least 3.5 sides are enclosed, so that the chickens have a place to get into when it's raining or snowing or when it's too windy. You want to make sure that they actually have a place to go in so they can snuggle up and be warm. Also make sure that you're still keeping the bedding, because they do need bedding and they want their feet to stay dry, and you don't want them to get wet or too drafty or too cold. Now make sure also that they have a door that you can close up and lock them away at night, because again, predators will try to get your chickens at night, so lock them up nice and safe. Okay, so now your chickens are about 6 months old and they're ready to lay. They'll probably start to produce their first egg around 4 or 5 months, but usually mine take about 6 months before we start seeing their eggs. Some of their eggs may be smaller or a little lighter colored, but that's just them getting used to actually laying, and it's their first egg, so it might look a little bit different from when they're fully producing eggs all the time. You want to start giving them layer feed at around 4 months old, because that's going to help them start laying their eggs rather quickly. So how do you keep the chickens laying in the first place? Well, it's layer feed. Layer feed is basically invented so that the chickens will have the correct amount of protein and nutrients. Most important protein though. So the protein is about 16 to 18%, and that's why I usually don't mix my own chicken feed. I find it's just easier for me personally to just purchase it, because then I know I'm getting the correct amount of protein for my chickens and the right minerals and vitamins and nutrients that they need to stay healthy. And if I try to mix that myself, well, maybe I might be 1 or 2% off here and there, and I can't be certain of that. So I just recommend purchasing it from the store, especially when you're first getting started. So purchase the layer feed, and that will get your chickens laying all the time. You're going to keep them on this layer feed basically for their whole lives, because they're going to be your laying hens, and that's what you want them to do. And in order to keep your production going nice and steady even throughout the winter, you want to keep them on that laying feed. So I personally use organic layer feed. At least try to get the non-GMO, just to make sure that you're practicing, chemical free with your birds. But that's just my personal opinion. You can do whatever it is you feel is right, but I do feel that it's right to feed the birds the best quality food that you can give them. So organically or non-GMO is probably best. So if your chickens are free ranging regularly like mine are here, you don't need to give them any of this next thing, and that is grit or oyster shells. Oyster shell and grit basically helps your chicken digest their food, because chickens don't have teeth and they have a gizzard where all of that food and the little tiny rocks and pebbles that they would get if they're free ranging goes in there and crushes up their food and helps them digest. But if your chickens are kept in an enclosed run or an enclosed chicken coop, then you will have to provide some sort of oyster shell or grit for them in order to help aid in digestion. Now, if you're free ranging, you don't have to worry about that, because they're going to get plenty of that from the natural environment. Now, eggs are pretty cool. Like the eggs in the chickens kind of looks like, to me, a conveyor belt, where at the very end of the conveyor belt, you have a fully ready chicken egg that's ready to pass through the chicken. But higher up the conveyor belt, the eggs are a little bit smaller and they have less and less of the egg shell on them. So it's kind of like a small little egg with the yolk, and then a small little egg with the yolk and a little bit of white, and then a small little egg with the yolk and the white and a little shell, and it just keeps going until there's a full egg. So sometimes you might get the chickens pass an egg that's not fully formed, or you might see something funny like that, but that's just because the chickens have eggs at different stages in them at all times. An occasional healthy treat for your chickens is just kitchen scraps. Chickens will absolutely love all the chicken scraps you give them, and there's no point in you throwing it in the trash if your birds are gonna love it. So make sure you give them an occasional handful of scraps here and there, but just make sure you're not feeding them completely from your pantry, because they have different nutritional needs than we do. Now, chickens need nest boxes. That's another important thing you have to think about when you're raising hens. So where are you going to get them to lay? Because at this point, they're going to start laying eggs for you. And chickens like a nice, secure, quiet place away from the other hens so that they lay. If the nest box is left out in the open or in the middle of the coop, the hens probably won't lay there, and they'll look for somewhere else to go lay their eggs, somewhere where they can get away from all the other hens and from all the other activity happening in the coop. Either on the side of the chicken coop or have it built into the coop where they can actually get in and get away from the other birds and all the activity happening. I've seen people with their chicken coops and they just leave the nest box like a little milk crate right in the middle of the coop, and then chickens don't use that to lay. They end up going somewhere behind the chicken coop or somewhere safer and quieter so that they can sit down and lay, because laying it takes them a little time and some concentration. So just give them that space, give them that privacy, and make sure the nest box is tucked in somewhere where the other birds aren't going to bug them. Now, you probably only need 2 to 3 nest boxes, because most chickens usually try to lay all their eggs in the same nest box. It's almost like if it's good for one, then it's good for all the rest, and they'll all tend to lay in the same boxes. So you probably don't need more than 2 to 3 nest boxes. Just make sure you keep it nice and clean, and you put lots of fresh bedding in there, and keep the coop nice and clean and dry as well. If you want your chickens to lay, keeping their feet dry is very important. Dust bathing. Chickens love to dust bathe, especially in the summertime when it's nice and dry and warm. They dust bathe basically to keep pests and things like that off them, and it's really good for like fleas and all of that. So they do have, a logic behind their dust baths. So if you can provide them a small little space that's dry that they can dust bathe in, they'll be super, super happy. You can just buy a play sand and just pour it beside the coop or where they hang out, and they'll use that as their dust bath. Chickens, they do get some diseases that you're gonna have to deal with. One of the biggest ones is mites, and you can usually treat that with a little diatomaceous earth. Now, people are gonna tell you not to use it, but that's just my personal opinion. I do use it in my coop, and it does help keep the mites off. Also, chickens can get infections, so it all depends on how much you want to spend on your chickens. If you want to call a vet, or if you want to administer some sort of antibiotics, you can do that as well. So there's some common questions I get all the time when it comes to chickens, and I'm going to answer a few of them here now. If you do have any other questions, make sure you leave them in the comment section and I'll answer them for you. One of the main questions I get all the time is, do I need need a rooster? Absolutely not. You don't need a rooster if you're just doing hens just for eggs. A rooster is only necessary when you want to have babies or when you want to have chicks. So just think of it as you would any other couple, male and female. So you will get eggs out of your chickens. If you don't have a rooster, you don't need that. The rooster is really only necessary for two things. Number one, keeping the flock safe, because he will sacrifice himself for those birds. And I've had a rooster who did so when a hawk tried to attack. He was the one that actually, you know, ran in the way and tried to scare the hawk away. That's his job. The second thing a rooster is great for is fertilizing the eggs, of course. Without fertilized eggs, you can't have chicks and you can't have any, you can't hatch your eggs. So the rooster will basically fertilize the eggs for 40 to 50 birds, maybe one rooster will do, no problem. So once you get a rooster, all of your eggs are going to be fertilized. So you will be eating fertilized eggs, but that's just because the rooster is there and he's mating with them. There's absolutely no difference between fertilized eggs and non-fertile eggs. It's just one is fertile and one is not. In order for the egg to turn into a chick, it has to get incubated, which means either the mom has to sit on it for 23 days or it has to go into an incubator for 23 days before the chicks hatch. So the eggs don't have any chickens in there. They're just fertilized. Another question is, do I need a heat lamp? Well, you only need a heat lamp for your chickens when they're chicks. Once the chickens are about 6 months old, that's considered pretty much fully grown. Under a year is considered a pullet, but at 6 months, they don't need anything else. All their feathers should be well developed and they should have enough down and enough feathers to keep them warm. I do get a lot of questions a lot on my social media about keeping them warm in the winter time, and you know, I get minus 30 degrees and it looks cold and it's cold for me. Well, they're chickens, so you're gonna be cold, but that doesn't necessarily mean the chickens are cold. They can handle cold. They're an animal, they're not a human, so they don't feel cold like we do. And I've never had a heated chicken coop, and I live in Canada, which gets really cold. And my chicken coop is not even insulated, it's just bare wood and well-built, solid structure. But there's no insulation, and I never use a heat lamp for my full-grown hens, ever. Do they need medicine? Well, it's up to you. If your chickens are sick, if they're experiencing any symptoms of anything, then absolutely yes, they will need medicine. But you don't need to provide medicine to them all the time, and I wouldn't be in there, you know, constantly checking on the birds and, you know, over-coddling them. They don't like that, and that actually creates more health problems. Just let them be birds, let them be animals, and things will usually work themselves out. If you do see that your chickens are sick, then absolutely seek out some professional help. What kind of predators eat chickens? Well, pretty much every predator you can think of. Hawks will eat chickens, possums will eat chickens, raccoons will eat chickens, other birds of prey will eat chickens, foxes, basically anything that can access your chicken coop will try to eat your chickens. So it's up to you to take the precautions to keep them safe. And the last question I usually get is, what kind of coop do I need? Well, that is completely up to you as the owner of the hens, what kind of coop you need. See, I have two different types of coops here. I have this one here, and then I have my main chicken coop, which is the big one with the door open. That's my main chicken coop. It's just a nice big open space. I can keep hundreds of birds in there because it's huge. There's 3 large nest boxes, a wooden roof. So that's how we built ours. Now you can purchase one from a store, or you can build a chicken tractor, or some people call it a chickshaw. You have many different routes you can go in. If you want to find out more about what kind of chicken coops you should get, I do have 2 videos that I recommend you guys check out, and those are pertaining to chicken coops and how to decide what type of chicken coop is best. So make sure you check here for that video. So guys, just want to let you know that once you start eating fresh eggs from your own hens, there's absolutely nothing like it, and you won't want to eat store-bought eggs. It'll kind of seem kind of gross to you actually, because there's absolutely nothing that compares to fresh farm eggs that you grew yourself, basically. And it's not difficult to raise your own hens at all. You just have to keep in mind a few things. For the main part, raising chickens is one of the easier things you can do. So don't let it scare you. Don't let anybody tell you that it's difficult, because it's really not. Homesteading in general and farming and raising animals is as difficult or as simple as you make it. So it's really up to you at the end of the day. The last thing I want to remind you is that if you do live in the city or near neighbors, just check your zoning laws to make sure that you're getting chickens, that it's legal, and that you're not breaking any rules. All right guys, well, I hope you learned something from this all about laying laying hens video. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay peaceful. Bye.